Hi, everybody. We'll get started in a couple minutes. Just make sure people have time to come in. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for taking the time out of your schedule to attend our webinar this evening, which is largely going to be about the new version of the ACT that just rolled out to everybody in the country 2 weekends ago. We'll get into sort of the major differences between the new test and the old test, what the implications are for college admissions and for students taking the test. Yeah, we'll kind of get into the weeds a little bit more in detail than our typical webinars, which are higher level. So, um, just quick rundown of what we'll cover tonight. Why the ACT is changing, and then how the structure and the scoring and the content, how all of that's changing, implications for college admissions, how we are at Gallon preparing students both on the test prep side and the college counseling side for those changes, and then sort of next steps looking forward. As far as Q&A, we'll be monitoring the chat and the Q&A as we go. We'll probably try to handle most of the questions at the end. If there's a particularly relevant one to something that we're talking about, maybe we'll interrupt and dive in on that. But in general, I would say plan to hold your questions till the end. A couple brief introductions. I'm Dan. I am our test prep director. Originally from the Pittsburgh area, I got my undergrad degree at Northwestern, and then moved up to Madison a couple years after that. And got a master's in public affairs here at UW. And I never left. I live in Madison with my wife and two kids, two little kids. And when I was in grad school, I started doing ACT, SAT, PSAT tutoring, and eventually came on to join the team full time. I've worked with hundreds of students over the last almost 13 years, worked with all of our test prep tutors to try to get the most out of our students and get their scores up. And I'll pass it over to Justin here to do his intro.
Thanks, Dan. My name is Justin. I'm the Associate Director of College Counseling here at Gallon. I'm originally from the Midwest, small city named Joliet, Illinois. No one really knows it unless you're a fanatic for the Blues Brothers. I'm a recent transplant to New Orleans, so thankfully I don't have to deal with the Midwest winters anymore. And like Dan, I'm also an alum of Northwestern. I'm hoping we have a really good football season this year, so fingers crossed. Right out of undergrad, I got my start working in admissions. I was a former assistant director of admissions at Northwestern. I owned the entirety of our East Coast. So in any given year, I was recruiting, reviewing, and also enrolling about 10% of our class. So I worked a lot. Over the past 12 plus years, I have lived and breathed admission at the undergrad level, graduate level, nonprofit, and also as a high school college counselor. So again, I'm here to add in some information more so on the counseling side when it comes to just how are all these changes that Dan is going to go over actually impact the work that you're doing to prepare for the admission cycle.
Great. Thanks, Justin. So let's dive in. Let's talk about why all of these things are happening, and unfortunately, why the class of 2027 is a little bit of a guinea pig with these changes. Unfortunately, it happens from time to time. When the SAT changes, there's certain classes that just kind of get the short end of the stick. Um, so first off, why is the ACT changing? And I just referenced this actually. Well, first of all, I guess I'll start with some terminology that I'll use throughout. The legacy ACT is the former version of the test. The new version, the terminology that the ACT is using is called enhanced. So when I refer to legacy versus enhanced, old versus new. So why the ACT is changing is because of the SAT, actually. In 2024, the SAT just radically retooled its test altogether. They shortened it by about 45 minutes, down from almost 3 hours to about exactly 2 hours and 14 minutes. When you add in a break, it's closer to 2.5. Every reading passage on the SAT, they changed it from sort of like long reading passages with lots of questions attached to them. Now, every reading passage is basically a paragraph with a question over and over again. It is fully digital. There is no longer a paper pencil option. And that is because the SAT is adaptive. And what that means, so your sort of classic adaptive test is you get a question right, the next question's harder. You get a question wrong, the next question's easier. What the SAT did was sort of that. They made it adaptive by section. So a student will take a reading writing section that's a mix of easy, medium, and hard questions. And depending on how they do on that section, they'll either get an easier second section or a harder one. And then the same for math. And you can't do that with a paper pencil test because it's going to adjust as students go through the test and adjust the difficulty. And the result of that was, which is what College Board wanted, the SAT surpassed the ACT in terms of the number of students that were taking it. And these two tests are always in competition with each other. They're in competition with each other for state contracts. They're in competition with each other for students taking them. Over the time that I've been tutoring, they've switched. ACT's been more popular, then SAT's been more popular. And with this latest switch, which I think the SAT correctly um, guessed, it was kind of a guess, that students would like a shorter test better, even if it was only on the computer. They seem to have guessed right. And so now the ACT has decided that they need to follow suit. So how is the structure of the ACT changing? This is the biggest thing. This is the legacy, so the former version of the ACT compared to the digital adaptive SAT. And you can see just that bottom line, how much longer, when the SAT made its changes, how much longer the ACT became, right? Over double the number of questions, an extra 41 minutes of time. Just showing that to a student alone would be like, nope, not doing that one. I'm doing the SAT. So the you can see the difference here. Math 16 fewer questions across the whole test. English and reading, less than half of the number of English and reading questions when you combine those sections on the ACT. No science section on the SAT. All of this made, understandably, again, the SAT a more popular option for a lot of kids. So what did the ACT do? The biggest change that many of you have probably already heard about is that the science section is now technically optional. Now, we're not treating it that way, and I'll talk more about that later on. I think Justin will probably touch on it as well when he discusses the implications for admissions. But what that means is that students don't have to register for the science section anymore if they don't want to. Again, we are still recommending it. We still think that certain schools want to care about it. We want to make sure the kids have a score if they need it. But technically, it's optional. And cutting off a whole section makes the test shorter. The ACT did not go fully digital. They gave students options. So there is an online version and a paper pencil version, and those are now the same. For a while over the summer, with a couple of tests, they were different forms of the test, but now everything is the same test, online versus paper pencil. The online version is basically as if somebody took a paper test and made it clickable, almost like a PDF. There's really no difference other than that. There's some slight strategy differences when you have that, but aside from that, it's basically the same test. But it's not adaptive. They didn't do what the SAT did and make it an adaptive test. It is still sort of what we call a linear test, very straightforward, like progress through each section in order. To an extent, there's some strategy nuances, but when the ACT spits out a form, we know the scale. There's no sort of magic to it. There's no like you missed this question, you get this. It's very straightforward. And so what happens when you cut out the science and then do some things to other sections? They cut out a third of the English questions. They cut out a quarter of the math questions. They cut down the reading passages from 10 questions apiece to 9 questions apiece. That allowed them to drastically cut down the number of questions to get it closer to what the SAT is. If a student takes the science section, they still take 44 fewer questions than they would have on the legacy version. Without the science, because the science is 40 questions, that's 84 fewer questions than they would have taken before. And without the science, the new version of the test is 50 minutes shorter. So what they did was by cutting down the number of questions, they actually gave students a little bit more time per question even, and that still has the effect of cutting it down without the science section. Another big change is including experimental items within the structure of the exam itself. So before, students would take English, math, reading, science, and then at the end of the test, after they were done, when it no longer mattered, they would get an experimental section, and they would be forced to sit there and do this experimental section when they're tired and they don't care. And so, from a test design perspective, it makes sense for the ACT to include these experimental questions within the exam. Students don't know what they are. The SAT also does this, by the way. Students won't know what they are. It's a full English passage, a full reading passage, a full science passage won't count. They were purely experimental for the ACT to test out passages for future exams. And then 4 math problems also won't count. And then other minor section changes that are happening. Each English problem will have a question stem. Before, if an English question just wanted a student to correct some grammar within a passage, they wouldn't tell them. They would just like say like underline a word and say correct this. Like there wouldn't be any sort of direction. Now every single question, no matter what type it is, has a stem attached to it, even if it's just which of these answers is the most grammatically correct. They cut down the number of math answer choices from 5 to 4. This is also the case on the SAT. There's 4 answer choices on a math problem instead of 5. Makes it a little bit easier. Makes guessing, 20 to 25%, a little bit more of a possibility to guess right. And so that makes it a little bit easier as well. One fewer wrong answer on every math problem. And then they added a science passage. So now there's 7 science passages instead of 6, and they just cut down the length of the other ones to make that fit in. So those are more minor changes. I think the biggest ones are optional science, shorter sections with more time per question, and the experimental items within the test itself. And so here's what that looks like. The legacy ACT is the left column, the former version of it, again, the 215 questions in almost 3 hours. You'll notice, it's not that much shorter if a student still takes the science section. It's only 10 minutes shorter. They do get more time per question. They cut down the English section by 10 minutes, the math by 10 minutes. The reading, they actually give kids more time, and the science as well. So, with the science, it's not all that different. Without the science, it's obviously quite a bit shorter. So that's the structure, how the structure is changing. Let's get into that, how that affects the scoring, because there's some nuances here that are important to understand. So everything's still on a 1 to 36 scale, just like it always has been. The max score on on an ACT section is still 36. However, because science is optional, and this gets confusing, so I'll do my best to explain it, but feel free to chime in with any questions. Science will no longer be included in the composite score. It will still be reported. When a student logs into their ACT account, they will still see a science score, just like they do all the other section scores. But the composite score is now an average of English, math, and reading only, not science. That is no longer included. It will receive its own section score out of 36. I'll talk a little bit more about the implications of that in a minute. You might wonder then, how do we compare scores across the two tests? Now, I will say one thing we've seen so far in our practice tests, and one thing that I mentioned before, right? It's not that much shorter. It's still matching up pretty nicely between the. I was worried that there'd be these wild swings in one direction or the other, but our practice tests are still sort of progressing in the same way that they have before, which is good. The scores are generally aligned with each other. There's a way to equate them to SAT scores. One nuance that only comes into play for a handful of students, but it still matters, is before, because the composite score was an average of 4 sections, English, math, reading, science, if you got a 0.5, it rounded up. So if you got, 230s and 229s, that would be a 29.5, that would round up to a 30. If you got 236s and 235s, that'd be a 35.5, and it would round up to a perfect score. Removing one of those sections, removing the science section, means now you're only averaging 3, and that gives you less room. Because let's say my example before, where you have a 30 in, let's say, math and science, and a 29 in English and reading, now that science score goes away. That no longer averages up to a 30, now it's a 29.3. And that averages down to a 29. So if you're thinking about a 36, if you have 36, 35, 35, that's not a 36 anymore. There are nuances like that. It's frustrating, frankly, on the test prep side, that we don't get those roundups anymore. But that is a reality of dividing by 3 instead of dividing by 4. There's less wiggle room. I'm going to talk about this in a minute too, but with fewer questions, this is the peril of designing a test with fewer questions and why an adaptive test can be shorter. You get into reliability issues with the scaling. When you have a fewer number of questions, you have fewer number of questions that you can miss to hit each score point, and you start skipping. And so I'll give you an example of that on the next slide here, actually. Let me just move on. I'm actually going to skip to the very bottom here, and then I'll work back up. The reading section now only has 27 questions that count because of the field test passages that I mentioned before, those experimental items. One full passage doesn't count. So you've already cut down the reading section from 40 to 36 questions, and now you've eliminated one 9-question passage. So now what you have are 27 questions that count on the 36-point scale. instead of 40 on a 36 point scale. And so what that means is if you miss a question, that might knock you down from a 36 to a 34. If you miss two questions, that might knock you down to a 33. Right? It's not a one-to-one the way it used to be, where you miss a question, you lose a point. It was a little bit more consistent from test to test. What that means on our end on the test prep side is a lot of times I'm not looking so much at the reading score, I'm looking to how many questions the student missed. Because that, if they missed 5 questions on a passage that doesn't count, they can get a 36. If they miss 5 questions on a passage that does count, on passages that do count, that might be a 28 or 29. And that's the wild fluctuations that I'm worried about as we look at the reading section in particular. It could happen on English too. And again, this is just sort of where how the experimental items work. Before every single problem on the ACT counted. Now there's some strategies that we have to think about for how we tell students to work through the sections because not every question counts, and we generally can get an idea of where those experimental passages might fall. And this also means, by the way, that students can get the same number of questions correct on a test and get different scores, which is always frustrating. This happened with the SAT when they changed to the adaptive version. We got a little work group here together to sort of explore what that test would look like. And we would sit there and be like, well, I missed 4 and you missed 2, but we got the same score. And that's because there's experimental items that didn't count. Another thing to mention here is superscoring. So a superscoring is when you can take a student's best section scores from different tests and combine them and make a better composite score. So here's an example of what that might look like. A student could take one official test and get that combination, 24 English, 26 math, 29 reading, composite of 26. And then they take a second test and their English goes up and their math and reading go down. Well, if we take the highest English, that 28, and the highest math and reading, now we have a super score of 28 that's higher than either of the separate composite scores. And so this is something that this is a change as well. The science is no longer included in super scores as soon as a student takes an enhanced test. So I don't know if we have anybody here that has a student in the class of 2026. This is more relevant to class of 2027 and onward. If you have a student in the class of 2026, so a current senior, that has not taken the new version of the ACT, the enhanced version, science will still be in their scores. As soon as a student takes the enhanced test, that triggers this new composite and super scoring where the science is removed. I'm happy to explain a little bit more about that going forward, but that's been a very confusing thing for a lot of families for rising seniors, or for current seniors now, I should say. And so just a little bit more on that. I basically said this already, but as soon as a student takes an enhanced ACT, their super score reflects that without the science section. That said, and this is where Justin will chime in a little bit later, colleges can kind of do what they want, and they always have. UW-Madison, for example, doesn't accept super scores. They only accept scores from a single sitting. Colleges might, certain programs, we can think STEM kind of programs might be interested in a science score, even though it's not included in the composite. Maybe more humanities, English, history kind of programs wouldn't have looked at the science score anyway. So just because the ACT is doing something doesn't mean that a college has to do it that way. A lot of them will default to what the ACT is doing, but for a long time, the ACT wouldn't superscore. They were insistent that the value of our test is that you sit there one time in a single session, and however you do, you do. And then when it became evident that a lot of schools were just ignoring that and superscoring anyway, the ACT started producing a superscore. So, colleges can kind of handle this the way they want to. They can superscore across versions. They can include science. They cannot. They can look at all tests. They can look at one tests. Every college is going to be different in the kind of scores that they want to see. And that's where we can come in and help. Good news is the content's not changing too much. I feel very comfortable now that I've seen some practice tests that the even some of our legacy practice tests have good problems that we can still practice with. The English is a little bit less grammar heavy than it used to be. Some kids will probably be happy to hear that. There's a lot more questions that are a higher proportion of questions, I should say, that are more reading focused. It's not that they added more of them. When they were removing questions, they got rid of some grammar ones. The math, again, when they get rid of questions, they have to be strategic about where that happens. More easy problems go away. The math is the only section on the test that gets harder as it goes along. And so when they go down from 60 to 45 questions from the legacy to the enhanced version, a lot of those 15 questions that get cut are easier math questions, and students hit the medium difficulty a little bit more quickly. One thing that used to be really nice in the reading section is that the passages always proceeded in the same topic order. Because the experimental passage is now included within the body of the test, if they proceeded in the same order every time, we would, it would always be one of the middle two. If there was a social science passage and a humanities passage that were passages 2 and 3, it would always have to be one of those that was the experimental one. So they had to jumble up the order so that maybe they got a fiction passage as an experimental passage, maybe they got a science, a natural. They had to mix them up so that it wasn't as predictable which passage type was experimental. But aside from that, I mean, there's just some structural differences, but the content being tested is basically the same. They've added an English passage. They cut down on the number of math wrong answer or the number of wrong answers on the math on each math problem. They cut down on one reading question and they added a science passage. So there's some structural differences that students that never took the legacy version aren't even going to know or care about. All right, I'll pass this part off to Justin.
Thanks, Dan. If you could hit the next slide for us. Thank you. So, towards what a lot of what Dan has said, with these changes, both when you're looking from the enhanced to the legacy and also taking a mirror image and how this is differ, even thinking about strategy for an ACT versus SAT, I've really boiled this down to three main areas that this is going to have implications slash really just hard impact onto your college admission strategy moving forward. The first is this really just shakes up the game and kind of changes the ACT as the quote unquote standard method of review when it comes to your college admissions processes. As Dan was saying, colleges have and will continue to do pretty much whatever they want to. And as we've been keeping our ears to the ground, whether it's our good friends over at University of Wisconsin-Madison or the large University of Wisconsin system, or friends at Georgetown versus friends at Baylor University, for example, a lot of colleges have been keeping a bit tight-lipped in regards to specifically the implications of the science section. So what we're seeing is both in terms of individual colleges, individual types of colleges, and also specific academic programs that may be read differently across a college's academic portfolio. You're definitely going to see a lot of variance in who's going to be requiring that science section. And a lot of that, and again, the feelings go out to this upcoming class of seniors because you all are going to be the test subjects of such, So after this year, we'll know a lot more moving forward, but just be prepared and definitely listen to your test support team in regards to start treating the science section like a tool, a resource, and a leverage point that it's great if you have it and you end up not needing to use it, but you don't want to be in a position, regardless of what your academic, focus may be, where you need it and you just don't have it. So that's definitely going to change in regards to how standard the ACT is, depending on different universities that you're applying to. Next up, we're definitely seeing that it's going to have more importance in our direct admission programs. Whether it is admission business programs like a Ross at Michigan or an ever popular Wharton at UPenn, whether it's engineering, computer science, even some of the more focused 4+1 programs, whether that's accelerated medical or that's accelerated business, knowing whether or not the ACT, just as a standard, the ACT plus the outside grading of the science section is going to play a role in really the specific direct admit programs that you're hoping and dreaming to be accepted into is going to become even more important, honestly, just because traditionally any direct admission program is much harder to be accepted into than your general just accepted to a university. And again, now with the changes that we are seeing and the implications we're anticipating moving forward, with the shakeup of both the general structure, but also excluding the science section, be prepared that your testing is going to take even more of a center stage in your overall academic evaluation and also just your evaluation of your candidacy from a holistic standpoint. And then finally, we're also anticipating and really keeping a forecast out for changes to the middle 50% of ACT scores as colleges, both in a sense of what a lot of our students, if you have any scholars at home, have been seeing in regards to coming back from their very first brand new ACT and saying, wow, that math section really kind of threw me for a loop. Uh, Please know that everyone is having that, regardless of where your diag says you're at. It kind of surprised everyone, honestly. So with that, we're expecting for the changes in the middle 50% to, of course, have a bit of fluctuation because of the difficulty of the math. Also, with the exclusion now of the science section as a standalone score, and as Dan was saying, making it much, much harder to be able to get a 36, for example, just over three subjects, as opposed to the previous four, we're definitely going to see some shakeups. And this year, we're going to be keeping a very, very strong eye on what those shakeups look like across the board, but also at specific type of universities, because it could go in a couple different ways. We could see some shakeups at certain universities where their middle 50 testing kind of returns back to the realm of quote unquote normal, because we saw a lot of huge spikes across universities, during and post pandemic, which was frightening a little bit in regards to, our scholars. We could see them go up, particularly for some of the already highly selective universities that may decide that, hey, we do or we don't want science, but because it's more difficult, we're probably going to see a shift towards more and more students only sending certain quote unquote top-notch scores moving forward. Or we might see, a blend of these, whether it's subtle changes at direct admission programs or it's subtle changes in the type of universities, whether it's our public flagship universities like a Madison, whether it is our private universities like Dan and I's alma mater at Northwestern, or even the small liberal arts on the East Coast. We're definitely expecting a shakeup in some way, shape, or form. So rest assured that both the college counseling team and the test prep team at Gallon are going to be keeping our, ears to the ground, so to speak, for any trends that we're seeing, any changes that we can, as much as we possibly can, forecast out. Thankfully, on the admissions and test prep side, we're a little better than average than weather people. So usually the things we forecast actually do happen. But these are, kind of the core three and the largest three as far as large scale implications that are more than likely you're going to see immediate kind of impacts from in regards to how you're prepping for the college admissions process and how you need to refocus on what this new ACT means for your preparation moving forward. I'll pass it back to you, Dan.
Great. I'll just add anecdotally and parenthetically, every single test, ACT or SAT, when you go on the forums and the Reddits and whatever afterwards, everybody always says, "Oh, that was the hardest math section I've ever seen." We never, so like we have to take that one with a grain of salt. We'll see how the scores actually come back next week, and then we'll have a better sense of what's going on. All right. So how are we preparing students for these changes? Right now, this is as of September 15th, 2025. Our advice is paper pencil exam with the science section, no writing. You have all of these options when you sign up for the ACT. Why paper pencil? There's not that many online testing sites, at least in our neck of the woods. Right now, that'll ramp up as time goes on, I would imagine. And anytime there's a new platform, paper pencil is much less likely to have some sort of glitch or issue than an online testing platform. So that's what we recommend. Now, schools, when they give the tests on state test day in March, a lot of schools will give it on the computer. They have in recent years, and I think it's gone fine. But just with the new availability of this at the proctoring sites, I would stick with paper pencil unless your student really, really has a strong preference for taking it on the computer. The science, I'll just repeat what Justin said, and I think probably repeat myself. Better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. It's also, a good skill builder for other sections. Even on the SAT, there are science-y questions built into the reading section. I anticipate as science becomes, optional and more truly optional, we'll start seeing charts and graphs and tables and things like that on the math and reading sections on the ACT as well. We'll also probably see a little bit more outside knowledge on the science section itself. That's something that's been forecast as well. And so lots of reasons to still sort of be up for the science section. No writing, no domestic colleges anyway require writing scores anymore. I know some international programs do, but there's no reason for a student to take the writing section at this point unless they have to. They do require that in school, in the school day testing, but just if you're signing up for one of the national test dates, you don't have to take the writing. Our test prep isn't changing much. Like I said, the content's basically the same. A lot of the timing and pacing strategies are still the same, just adjusted for the new timing. The legacy ACT material is perfectly fine. The questions are basically the same. So I have no problem with any of that. And we're still using all of that same material. The ACT, before they made this change, was the same for 25 years at least. And so we still have lots of good material that we can use. That said, some students may prefer the SAT over the ACT, even with this adjustment to the ACT format, and maybe because it's uncertain. Um, and actually, I'm going to address the question in the Q&A, which was, because I think it's relevant here, which was with these fluctuations, would taking the SAT be better for the class of 2026 going forward? I think that's a lot of that's still going to be depending on personal preference. It is strange right now for me that I've been tutoring the ACT for so long that the SAT is all of a sudden the more established exam, even though it's like a year and a half old in its current form. I think it's a lot of it is going to be student preference. Now, again, we'll know more over the next couple months when these first fall administrations at the national level we start seeing scores and start seeing what the actual test questions and format looks like. Um, but in general, we've just been advising students to, when they come in and do a consultation with us, try both, see which one you like better. Try an SAT, try an ACT. We can, see which one you like better. We can, there's a mechanism for equating scores across the test that sort of tells us that a certain one of the tests might be better for a student than the other one. A lot of times, the ACT and SAT are good at this kind of stuff. A lot of times those scores come back pretty close to each other. And so it does sort of end up student preference. You know, um, if a student has an athletic tournament on a weekend where they're giving one test or the other, maybe they pick the one where they don't have the scheduling conflicts. If you're in Wisconsin, everybody takes the ACT anyway in school if they go to public school. So there's lots of nuances to that. I'll get into that in a minute when we talk about how we can help you make that decision. But just we have seen a little bit more SAT demand because people are aware of these changes and the uncertainty around the ACT right now. We'll also get them familiar with the online platform because a lot of them will take it in school, and they might prefer to do it. There's lots of features that are really helpful that are very similar to the SAT features as well. One that I particularly like is there's a way to bookmark a question in the exam and see exactly which questions you've marked instead of like in a paper pencil booklet circling it and having to like flip back pages to find what you circled and which ones you weren't sure of. You can see or a timer or not to how much time you have left. There's ways to cross out answer choices or hide them, to highlight parts of paragraphs, annotate. There's a built-in calculator. It's not nearly as robust as the one the SAT has contracted with, but something else students can use. It's kind of just a basic scientific calculator, nothing special. If they do decide to do an online test instead of the paper pencil one, they can bring their own computers or they'll get a device provided by the site and you just indicate that when you sign up. So, even though we are strongly recommending paper pencil, we can still prepare students for the online version as well. So going forward, some questions that I still have, and that I have a sense of what the answers are going to be. I mentioned this before, there's not a ton of online testing availability right now, except for the tests that students can take in school. So how are sites going to handle that? If they do get more demand for online testing versus paper pencil? Um, how long? I think I should change this question really to how long will the ACT continue to offer a paper pencil version? It sure seems like this is the first step to going to an adaptive exam as well, like the SAT has. Again, if you want a shorter test to be valid, you kind of have to go that direction. I hope not for our practice material and scaling and all of that sake, but it seems like that might be coming. Um, and that's the fourth bullet point here as well. Both will it go online and will it be adaptive? And how long will the science section stick around as something viable? The ACT made the writing, or colleges, I guess, treated the writing. The ACT didn't do it. The colleges started de-emphasizing the writing at a certain point. I think everybody is anticipating that's eventually going to happen with the science section, but that we don't know for a couple of years until colleges really give us a sense of how they're going to handle it. So how can we help? We talked about a lot of this already, I guess, but one thing that I always like to emphasize on the test prep side is that we both do one-to-one and personalized test prep, and those sound the same, but they're different. One-to-one, meaning that you get matched up with a tutor that will work with your student throughout the duration of their test prep. It's not a class. It's not you get whoever's here. We are careful to try to make the right fit between tutor and student, both in terms of personality and scheduling needs and all of that. And then personalized, we have a loose curriculum, but it's not something that tutors have to follow step by step. And this is something we emphasize with them when we do training. Customize it for your student. Work on what they need to work on. There's no such thing as, well, we haven't covered this yet. We're kind of good at it. Let's do it. Like, there's no, like, we can't cover this because we have to cover this. That's not how we operate. We want to customize it for your students' needs. And so how we do that is we recommend certain lesson packages based on where a student comes in. It's very important to meet consistently so that we can work on any content gaps and strategies that your student has. We do regular practice tests with students. Those are all sort of the major components of the test prep side. Justin, you want to chime in on the college counseling programs?
Definitely. So the way that we're able to be of success, similar to test prep, is that all the work we do with our students is individualized. We offer a range of different ways for us to meet you where you're at in regards to our packages, whether that's comprehensive focus counseling, where everything is included. We call it our most inclusive. So whether that is for our students who want a month by month check-in, that's for students who once they get to their senior year and things are a little bit busier, maybe they want every 2 weeks. Again, everything is included from guidance on how to navigate the specific test scores that you should be really aiming for, depending on the tier and also academic programs that you're hoping to be able to apply as and universities you're hoping to apply to. For hourly counseling, again, the kind of the name says it all. These are for any of our clients that we're working with where you feel like, hey, if you maybe have a couple older siblings and you feel like when it comes to figuring out which colleges you're interested in, or maybe even working on your essays, you kind of have together when it comes to the strategy of why you should apply or really what type of testing you should be looking for, you can be able to have a little bit more control on only having us on an hourly basis fill the gaps and give you that type of level of support. Um, we're starting to run out of spots for this third one, which is our highly focused essay review. That speaks to just how popular Gallon is and also just how amazing our staff is. We do have an amazing team of fully focused essay specialists where, again, if you're really just looking to fill the gaps, maybe in the support that you need for your college process, we are definitely ready to be able to fill that gap for you in regards to working with you exclusively, whether it's your personal statement, whether it's college or university specific essays, supplemental essays to be specific as well, that you might need some assistance in really just taking from start to finish. And then in select cases, we also do offer some individualized application review. If you feel like, hey, we're kind of at the ninth hour, I feel good about my application to Carnegie Mellon, but I think I would really like someone else to have their eyes on it. We also can offer that, as well. So again, similar to kind of the work that we do on the test prep side, we really aim to be there in every which way that you possibly could need us from a college counseling. So definitely reach out to us. I'm sure that we'll be able to figure out where we can fit in terms of helping you all not only prepare for your application process, but cross that finish line in a lot less of a stressed out sense as most high school seniors and their families do.
Great. Next steps for you all, if you're not already working with us. Set up a consultation with me on the test prep side. And it's still a great time for juniors to get started. You have the whole year. Our packages span 6 to 9 months typically, so that's plenty of time to get started on a full test prep package with us. We also advise that students take the PSAT in October. Every school will offer it. Most schools, it's an opt-in, not a requirement. And so sign up for that. If nothing, there's sort of no downside for a lot of kids. The upside is you can get national merit if you're a high scorer. But for most people, it's just like do your best. It's good practice for a standardized test in a proctored setting, especially if a student's taking the SAT. It's the same test, basically, just a little bit easier. So we always recommend that students give the PSAT a try. I'll let Justin talk about college counseling.
Definitely. So, similarly, please sign up for a meeting, a free consultation as well with myself or anyone else on our team, as these testing requirements are constantly changing. As we're still trying to figure things out, whether it is University of Wisconsin-Madison is your dream school, you're hoping for somewhere on the East Coast, or even maybe a Pomona College on the West Coast. We're going to be there, keeping track of everything and also being able to give you kind of that information behind the scenes so that you feel as up to date as you possibly can and you're less worried about what the future of our testing may hold and more so prepared that regardless of what curveballs our industry throws at you, Galen's going to have your back, and we're going to be able to help you prepare, as best as you possibly can for this college admissions journey. Because again, the one thing that we do know right now is that colleges are going to be approaching this enhanced ACT differently, and you need someone that has your back that is, well versed in this area and also really flexible to kind of change with the wind if it comes to that. So again, for test prep, sign up for a free consultation. Same for college counseling for a free consultation. We really are just an email and a quick and very, very friendly Zoom conversation away. And with that, I think we still have enough time for additional questions, right, Dan? In
Yeah,
case
I'll just
anyone wants
say,
to drop anything in the chat.
yep. The only other thing I'll say is look out. We send a lot of stuff, probably too much sometimes, but not. Don't tell anybody I said that. No, we send a lot. We send out lots of emails and newsletters and blog posts and webinars, and we're running various classes and workshops and seminars all the time for people. And so we cover lots of bases. We everything from test prep to we didn't even talk about other services that we have like executive functioning and academic coaching. So we do lots of stuff here. And if you're working with us on college counseling, or test prep or vice versa, you can work with us on with other services if you need them. We're here for you. And here's our contact information if you have any questions. But as Justin said, yeah, go ahead and feel free to drop any questions into the Q&A or into the chat. And we have some time to answer them. And if we don't have any, I think we can call it. I'll give people another minute.
Think we either did such an amazing job
Oh, we
at
got one.
filling the gaps.
How can we
Oh, we got
schedule a
one.
free consultation? Great question. On the test prep side, email me. On the college counseling side, Justin, I'd say email Justin, right?
Email me. Yeah.
Yeah.
We are readily available to speak with you.
Yep. If you shoot me an email, I'll respond pretty quickly and send over my calendar.
I'm here on the college counseling side as well. Then we got another question.
Any guesses on where test optional may be headed in the near future? Toward less test optional. More tests. Yeah, Justin. I mean, this is more your account than mine, but uh, one slide that I didn't put in here that I could have that I've used a lot is it was test optional for a long time, mostly due to the pandemic, and now that that has receded into the past for many people. Many schools are starting to require scores again. It sort of started in the Southeast and worked its way to the coasts, and now it's moving its way into the Big Ten. So more and more schools every year are requiring tests again. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Justin.
No, definitely. I agree. And the reason behind that really is we all know with the pandemic, there were so many different challenges that we all, face that universities were trying to do their best to remain as flexible to meet the students where they're at and not exacerbate what was already a very, very difficult chapter for our students, especially developmentally. Now that we're coming out of that, we're going back to kind of, I guess you could call it the traditional or the old school adage of testing, whether it is the ACT, the SAT, or even looking at a variety of subject tests. They're one of the few equalizers, that we do have in our field. And universities are going back towards that to be able to kind of again use that as a general barometer, regardless of what high school academic background you're coming from. So you're scoring the ACT, you're scoring the SAT, helps them get a sense of really where you might be and if you're ready for the challenges and the academic rigors on their campus, regardless if you came from an IB curriculum, you came from an AB curriculum, your school only offered honors. Again, being able to study, get that support, prepare for your standardized testing allows them just to make a little bit more of an accurate assessment of where you're at in regards to where they need you to be a successful student on their campus. So, and again, as Dan has said, the trends that we're seeing, it's coming back. It's coming back with a slow force, but I think the force is fairly consistent right now. And we would if we had to, we'd probably be, placing a bet on more and more universities in the next couple of years, starting to go back to what was the old norm, pre-pandemic. Any other questions we can possibly answer for you all? Or did we do such an amazing job that you all are stunned by our level of knowledge? Or you're really just trying to hop off this and probably see Monday Night Football? It could be a myriad of reasons if you don't have questions.
Yeah, well, I think we can say goodbye for the evening. Have a good rest of your night, everybody. Thank you so much for coming, and always feel free to reach out with any questions or concerns. We're happy to share our knowledge as best we can.
Take care. Have a good evening, everyone.